celebrating Valentine's Day here with me. It's nothing that says Valentine's Day more than data, technology, and marketing. Just out of curiosity, how many of you guys work in marketing or advertising? Is there anyone that works in the industry? Okay, a few people. Okay. So just to give everyone a heads up, this is going to be more. This presentation is going to be more about breadth than depth. So we're going to try to cover a lot of ground, but we're not going to have the time to go really deep into anything. So there might be some concepts, especially for those who work in the industry, that are not new. So if it's not something that you already know, just kind of bear with me. Okay. So quickly, a little bit about me. Like Gary said, I founded Skeleton Key, which is we're a data and tech consultancy specifically for brands, and we're about a year old, so it's not like a big company. It's very early days right now, and I have my whole career has been in digital advertising, over 15 years. Started my career in Chicago. And then I kind of jumped around, over the years, spent time in New York, San Francisco, Shanghai, and then I've been in Singapore since 2017. And I MITB alumni as well. They gave me like a pin, an alumni pin to wear. So I'm going to wear it just to prove, I'm an alumni. But I was analytics track 2022. So the agenda today, we'll do like a quick kind of scene setting overview. And then we'll discuss, again, the topic is data and tech, specifically for modern marketing, right? So we'll talk about how, for a lot of how modern marketing functions these days, data is pretty much what fuels the industry. And then we'll go through some examples of use cases that the data, actually enables. And then we'll talk about the tech that provides the infrastructure for those use cases. And then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A as well. So, obviously we'll tackle whatever questions that come up. All right, so in terms of marketing, I think in advertising, there's lots of different definitions, ways to think about it. But I think everyone kind of intuitively knows what it is. But in terms of just like a mental model that I think makes it very simple, is you have the creative, which is basically the message. It's like the experience, is the advertisement. It's whatever the brand is trying to communicate to their customers, users, prospects, etc. And then you have media, which is where the messages and the creative and ads can go, right? So if you think of, the different channels where ads can show up, websites, apps, TV, out of home, that sort of thing. And so if you think creative is basically the message, and the media is the vehicle for that message. And like I said, these days, the vast majority of marketing is done through digital channels, and then even traditionally offline channels like TV is transferring to like streaming and connected television. There's digital out of home, and radio is kind of shifting to podcasts these days. So almost everything is going digital, and as a result, data is pretty much the fuel that powers kind of the entire ecosystem, and then technology is the infrastructure that allows that data to actually do something. So that's pretty much the heart of what we'll try to cover today. So starting with data as fuel. We'll start by defining what data, quote unquote, refers to in the context of marketing. Because data can mean a lot of things, right? Depending on the industry you're in, what you do, the data can take different forms. But in marketing, I would say these are, by and large, the main types of data you're looking at. So I'll just kind of go through the table here. So you have, customer profile data, which is basically user data, right? So things like contact details, like phone number, email, the user's demographics, what they're interested in, their behaviors, etc. That can come from things like customer CRM. For those of you taking pictures, we'll make the slides available after too. So you guys will have a copy of everything. For your own reference. You have customer signups, user logins for web portals, loading programs. So basically all that falls under the category of customer profile data. And then there's digital behaviors interactions. So that's data that's generated from online interactions with a brand or product. So if I were to go to, SMU is not it is a brand. If I were to go to their website and click around and stuff like that, well, they're going to know I did that, and that's digital interaction data, right? So that falls into that category, and that can come out of anything from web to app analytics, emails, social media, etc. And then there's campaign data. So campaign refers to marketing campaigns, like advertising campaigns. So data collected from advertising campaigns and ad platforms. That's this category. So those three are very kind of fast-moving digital programmable data. So a lot of what fuels the kind of data and tech infrastructure are those first three categories. The last two, however, are still involved, but these are like the larger, kind of more research population level data. So you have like things like panels, market research, so data collected through like surveys, focus groups, industry research. So those of you in the industry probably you've heard of Global Web Index, things like Forrester, customer surveys, that falls into that category. And then alternative sources is pretty much everything else. So things like competitive data, like social listening, even like census would fall into like that category. So when we talk about data in marketing, it's pretty much these categories. Now, the other important thing to keep in mind when we talk about data in the industry is usually it's described from the POV of the data owner. And what I mean by that is, depending on the point of view of the people that own and collect the data, that's kind of how it's described. So you have first-party data, which is data collected from customers and users from owned and operated properties. So if I'm a brand and I collect data about my users, that's my first-party data. That includes CRM data, data from their web and app, and data that's generated from their campaigns. And second-party data is, again, we're talking about point of view, right? Second-party data is just another company's first-party data that can be shared through a partnership. So if, for example, if I'm a retailer or I'm a CPG brand, I'm working with a retailer, and that retailer shares with me data about their loyalty, the people in their loyalty program, that would be second-party data to me at CPG. Or if I'm running an ad campaign and I'm working with a publisher and they package data for me about their customers in the MITB, that also counts as second-party data. And the third-party data is data from external marketplaces or aggregators. And it's different from second-party because it's sourced through intermediaries. It's not like a direct relationship, right? So location data from like people that aggregate data from different sources, that counts. Demographic and interest data from different data vendors, that would also count in this category. And first-party data is by far the most important if you're a marketer in this category because it's unique to the owner, meaning that no one else, as in no other, or unless it's stolen, but no one else should have access to that data unless like you decide to license it out and that sort of thing. It's also the most accurate and most actionable because it's you're sourcing it directly from customer interactions or from interactions with your properties, etc. And as a result, it's more personal, more usable for the use cases that we'll kind of cover later. And then last but not least, it's the most privacy compliant and kind of feature resilient, meaning that if you're doing things properly, you're collecting this data with the consent of users to be then used for marketing. So it's the most kind of feature resilient form as well. And just to use an example to bring it to life, so if we take Adidas as like a brand, right? Their first-party data might be purchase histories, the purchase history of their customers through their e-commerce site. Second-party data might be a partnership. If they were to have a partnership with JD Sports and they're sharing data through there, that would be to them second-party data. And then third-party data would be interest-based, like audiences that might just get from a data vendor. And just an example. And then a quick word on data privacy. I think everyone is aware, like you kind of in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a really big kind of increase in the awareness and focus on people's like data privacy, right? And I think as a result, consumers are a lot more in tune with how their data is being used, and there's greater demands for transparency and trust for that sort of thing. And I think things like Cambridge Analytica, I mean, they made a whole documentary out of it, so like on Netflix. So like a lot of that kind of made consumers and society aware, and as a result, that's led to a lot of changes in the industry. Everything from like regulation. So the biggest one was GDPR in the EU, and then CCPA in California. But those led to kind of a cascade of global changes in terms of data privacy laws, etc. And then that in turn led to technological changes. So Apple's app transparency tracking, program where a lot of the signals that used to be collected from iOS devices now don't exist anymore. Third-party cookies are kind of just going away. Like they still exist, but like I know on Safari they pretty much don't. On Mozilla they pretty much don't, and on Chrome a lot of people are opting out. So that because of those kind of tech changes, that's led to a general decrease in the amount of signal that's in the industry, and then that in turn has led to marketers having to kind of change the way they behave and the industry itself changing, which has led to the last box, which is new technologies that are functioned to work in this kind of new ecosystem. And we'll go through those as we go through the presentation. All right, so we talked about the data. What does that data enable in terms of use cases for marketers? I think generally speaking, the use cases fall into three categories, and they're connected. And sometimes like the lines aren't like super clear. It's planning, so using the data for planning, whether that's like larger go-to-market strategy, whether that's planning in terms of creative messaging, whether that's more tactical in terms of where you want to place your ads. That all kind of falls into that category. Activation, which is basically actively using that data to do something. We'll go through examples of that. And then measurement, which is what it sounds like, right? It's measuring the effectiveness of whatever marketing that you're doing, and that's the last category. So starting with planning, I'll start with an example I think most of you are familiar with. So obviously segmentation, it's not limited to marketing. I mean, the customer segmentation, it exists in pretty much every single industry. For those of you who haven't or don't work in an industry where this is involved, it's basically organizing data sets into smaller, more specific groups based off of shared characteristics, behaviors, needs, that sort of thing. And I guess the important thing to keep in mind here is that segmentation, it's a means to an end. It's not like something that achieves anything on its own. Usually you do the segmentation to break the customers or your users into cohorts, and then with those cohorts you do something else, right? It's kind of an intermediary step. And there's largely like two broad categories of segmentation. The first is rules-based, which is basically like, it's the more basic type. It's manual heuristics, where, users are manually grouped into predefined segments. So like you have segments based off of their demo, based off their location, based off their interests, but there's not much cognition that's added to it. It's pretty basic. You don't need a lot of data for that, so it's kind of more of a it's more of something that you would do if you have a simple use case, right? So there's a few examples here, like sending a promotion to baby products to women aged 25 to 40 because they might be of age where they might become mothers, travel discounts to users in specific geos. So it's very kind of simple use cases. And then the other broad category is data-driven, which is things like clustering, techniques that use some sort of machine learning or probabilistic technique to analyze larger data sets to try to uncover hidden patterns that are less obvious than like simple, like, hey, I want these people who I know do these things. And it also has the ability to dynamically change like the people who are in these cohorts, for more kind of real-time use cases, right? So examples here would be creating segments based off of the likelihood. So you're starting to be doing stuff that is more predictive versus just kind of looking backwards. Likelihood of people that will purchase specific categories. For finance, a very common use case is identifying consumers that are at risk for like churning, that sort of thing. And then for travel, it can be layering on different types of characteristics. So you might want folks that are price sensitive, but also frequent flyers. So there's ways of doing that. And then the last thing I'll say is that there's certain types of rules-based clustering that can then be enhanced with data-driven approaches. So for customer segmentation, like RFM is something that some of you guys might have heard, but you're clustering users by recency, like purchase frequency, as well as how much they spend. So you can do that obviously in a very kind of static rules-based thing that you can apply, algorithms so that you can update those in real time, etc. So that's one way they kind of work together. Second category of planning is insight generation, and it's what it sounds like. You're generating insights from the data you have access to, right? In terms of why this exists, you're doing this to inform or enhance the marketing brief, so you can identify the opportunities for marketing. Everything from the category, getting a sense of the go-to-market strategy for the category you're in, understanding product usage, so that you can better position your product for growth. Looking at the culture or the geography that you're advertising in. So, for example, if I'm advertising in Singapore versus Indonesia, like you'll want to you want to approach that differently. You can use data to inform that, and then the customer itself, so their pain points, needs, etc. And then the what is helping bring those opportunities to life through the media and the creative. So that would be understanding what channels that you should be advertising in or doing marketing in to reach your customers, how you should be flighting your campaigns. Flighting is in how long your campaign should run and when they should run. So you might be looking at things like seasonality, like are there holidays, are there like different seasons for different kind of things, the actual targeting itself, and then what kind of messaging you should have. And that can all be done by generating insights out of the data. So here I've included 6 examples of insight generation. Obviously, it's quite a wide range of things you can do. And each of them use different types of data. So really quickly going through, like seasonal search habits, that would be, in this case, second party data because you're looking at Google's search trend data, right? It's directly their data. Social media topics, this is like social listening, like sentiment analysis. This can be either second or third party, depending on where you source it from. Points of interest, location data, also second or third. Media channel preferences, this would probably be some sort of general research, so that's definitely third. Customer retention analysis, that's assuming it's your customers, that's first party data. And then demographics and interest, that can be all 3 categories depending on how you slice it. All right, so activation, which is literally activating the data that, actively doing something with it. So the first category here is what we call audience addressability, which is basically a fancy way of saying targeting paid or owned messaging to specific users or groups of users. Don't worry, I'll talk through the graph. I'll make sense of it. So if in terms of the type of data that comes into play here, it's going to be different in terms of the scale, how large the data sets are, and the granularity, meaning like how specifically you're looking at specific people. And that's going to depend on the marketer's goal. So if you look at the chart here on the y-axis, you have audience scale, right? So that refers to how large the target audience of a marketing campaign is going to be. So higher, it's going to be something like you might be targeting the entire country or something. And if you get lower, it might be like a very specific group of users, right? So that's what that refers to. And then the x-axis refers to how well the marketer knows the user. Okay, so on the left side, which is more reliant on anonymous data sources, whereas the right side is more reliant on like actual first-party data, so people that you know. So if you kind of look at the different use cases, like one-to-many is when, hey, like I have a campaign up, it's a very broad, large branding campaign, and you want to use channels you're reaching as many people as possible, so that's one-to-many. One-to-few means, all right, so it's not like kind of the entire population anymore, but it's also not like kind of one-to-one. So it might be people that are in market for the category or like have already shown some sort of interest for whatever you're selling. It can be people that have engaged with your properties, other kind of segments, and then here you might have a very specific channels where you want to reach them. For example, like maybe you want to hit them through YouTube, through social media, through some sort of like web or app customized experience. And then one-to-one would be individual accounts, right? So like, and that would be more kind of like push notifications or like email blasts and that sort of thing. And then algorithmic media buying. So it's basically like the way that campaigns are optimized through algorithms these days. Virtually all digital advertising campaigns these days that have some sort of direct response objective. Direct response meaning you're trying to get someone to do something, right? Download, you're trying to get someone to buy something, you're trying to get someone to click on something, etc. Almost all those campaigns these days are optimized using pretty large, pretty fancy machine learning algorithms. And just to kind of go through what you're looking at, on the left side are examples of data signals, right? The context of the user, the creative that's being delivered, the behaviors of the people, your customers, and that's being ingested through these algorithms. And then the algorithms are set to optimize through the campaign goals that you, the marketer, would enter. And then what happens is like these algorithms, they are built into buying platforms. So Google has their different algorithms, Meta has their algorithms, and so on and so forth. So they have those are kind of off the shelf existing algorithms. These days, more advanced marketers are also customizing their own algorithms. There's actually like businesses that offer custom algorithms as a service where like the marketer might know that, hey, I want to weigh certain parameters. I want to change the weighting on terms of how I value different types of customers, different contexts. You can bring that to the algorithms themselves. So those are kind of, but that's like most people don't use that, but that's also a, a line of businesses that exist out there. And then I think the last thing I'll say here is that a lot of the signals on the left side, like those are pretty much the same signals that were used for like manual targeting, like I don't know, like 10 years ago. But so like a long time ago, pretty much all this stuff you had to enter into the platform yourself manually. I mean, the algorithms exist, but they weren't as like quote unquote smart as they are now. And that reflects a kind of a general trend in the industry of um, complexity being abstracted away from the front end, meaning like in the past, media operators, they used to kind of manage the settings and optimize things like manually move budgets around that sort of stuff. Whereas like over the past 5 or 6 years, more and more of that has been shifting away from the front end, moving to the algorithms. So now like these days, like there's on Meta and Google, they have products where you literally just upload, your goals. You upload maybe some data. You upload creative assets like your messaging, some logos, etc., and it'll just kind of do all the work for you. The plus side is that they'll perform well, but there's very little transparency. So there's a lot of debate right now whether that's a good thing or bad thing. But that's something that's kind of a general trend that's happening, and then obviously with AI, it's going to blow up even more, right? And the personalization. So it's kind of similar in the sense that it's also these use cases are also shifting from more manual or rules based to algorithmic and automated. On the left side are examples of personalization use cases. So context would be tailoring the experience depending on the specific context, the real time context a person's in. So if someone's in a certain location, the weather is something, different time of day, they might get a different message. Interest based, whatever interest they've shown in the past. Purchase would be trying to get customers to complete or repeat purchases on like a short term basis, and then loyalty is more tactics for like retention and long term loyalty, that sort of thing. So on the right side, there's kind of two buckets, right? There's marketing orchestration, AI decisioning. So marketer orchestration is more how things were done in the past. Again, it was more manual. Marketers will go into these platforms, they'll define, the audiences they're interested in, and then they'll go in and map like the customer journey that they want them to go through. They could do A/B tests to determine which ones are more efficient for et cetera, et cetera. But these days, more and more, it's moving to more AI decisioning. So it's very similar to kind of the last slide, except here this is not less focused on paid media and more focused on like own experiences, like for example on your website through email, like those kind of touch points, right? Not paid advertising, but like own experiences where you just upload the campaign inputs and you kind of let the AI kind of optimize everything. It's not like as black and white as I'm saying, but that's kind of the general trend that things are moving towards. And then the last category is measurement. So this is, I mean, in my opinion, this is probably the hardest part of everything. Like as a marketer, like this is where I think people have the biggest headaches. There's a famous quote in marketing from a guy named John Wanamaker. He's like early like 1900s. He was this like guy who like pioneered like retail right from the U.S. The quote, and you got a lot of you probably heard of it. his quote is, "Half the money I spend on marketing is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half." That's the quote. So the stuff here are methods that try to attempt to kind of help people understand which half is hopefully not being wasted. Um, Starting from the left, multi-touch attribution. So attribution refers to how credit for advertising results are assigned to different touch points, right? So historically, the industry has largely relied on something called last click attribution, which sucks for anything that's not search. I mean, doesn't you probably think about why it's not very great? Like seriously, like did any of you guys click on ads on purpose? Like not an accident. Did any of you guys? Okay. So like if you're trying to gauge how well you're doing with your marketing based on something that no one does on purpose, it's probably a bad idea. But the crazy thing is like that's kind of how it's been done for like ever, and less people are doing it now, but it's still being done by a lot of people. So that's not good. And multi-touch attribution is a way to try to get better at it. Um, so these days, like it's also kind of turning into a scenario where marketers have no choice because of like third-party cookies getting less and less viable, device IDs on mobile devices kind of also fading out on iOS. A lot of last click attribution models are no longer working because the signals that are needed for them to work no longer work right. So multi-touch attribution or data-driven attribution is basically a way, it's a way to use machine learning and probabilistic modeling to distribute credit for digital conversions across different touch points on a customer's journey. Whether that's like, because a lot of times like you might click around, you might do a lot of things online, and then eventually decide to buy something. But then, most of the time it's not because you saw something, clicked on it, and directly bought it. You do a whole bunch of stuff, or maybe you saw like a billboard or something, right? Now, in terms of techniques that are involved with multi-touch attribution or MTA, it's also called data-driven attribution, so you might hear that as well. It's largely, there's two main like statistical techniques. One is called Markov chains. The other is Shapley values. I don't know if it might be something, if you guys are in analytics, you guys might hit that at some point. But kind of on a high level, Markov, it basically analyzes a customer journey on probabilistic sequences. So where the impact of every touch point depends on where on the path towards conversion that is. It kind of scores it differently. And Shapley is something that comes from like game theory, where it calculates the marginal contribution of each touch point, each touch point relative to kind of the contribution of everything. Okay. So just obviously you don't have to memorize that, but it's like in case if you guys are in the industry, like those two might come up in regards to MTA. And then the middle box is randomized control trials. So I think most of you have heard of A/B testing, like you try to test two things and isolate the results. Randomized control trials is basically like the most scientific version of that. And it's a set of techniques where you're trying to quantify the incremental sales or brand lift of your campaigns through experiments, right? And the key word here is incremental because you're trying to separate the impact of your marketing versus something that would have happened anyways, and you just happen to take credit for that. That's what incrementality stands for, and it's a key concept, and it's something that is it's getting a lot more attention these days. And the way it generally is set up is it's either through something called geographic holdouts or match market testing, where you might turn off your activity for like one geographic region, like a city or a town, and keep it on for another one where a lot of the characteristics are very similar, and seeing kind of what happens between the two, and the difference is like the incremental lift, right? And then the other way of doing it is through holding out a specific population of people that you have access to, and that population would be like the control group. They don't see your ad, or they see something that is not your ad, but it's like a public service announcement, that kind of thing. And then the other group sees your ad, and you kind of see the lift there. So those are a lot of ad platforms have those kind of products built in, so it's not something you need to kind of build in yourself. They have tools that allow you to do that. And then the last category econometric modeling. The other term that's used for this is marketing mix modeling, which is probably the more common way of referring to it. So there's like MTA and randomized control trials, like they're good for like individual ad channels. So like if you're just running search or you're just running display or video, they're good for like a single channel, especially if they're digital channels, but they're not great for offline channels where there's not like digital signals. And they're also not good at looking at the contribution of all of the marketing activity for a certain brand kind of next to each other. Especially if it's like a large global brand that's like running across like 10 different channels, right? So that's where this comes in. The idea here is that it's mainly based in like linear regressions in terms of like the actual statistical like approach. But the idea is that you treat these models, they treat sales and revenue as the dependent variable, and then the different marketing channels that they're active in are the independent variables, and then it'll create like coefficients that quantify the different contributions of each. And then like marketers can build in things like seasonality or macroeconomics into it and try to take into account different things that might impact the performance. And like the thing that is important when you're kind of thinking about all three of these techniques in totality is that they have very different timescales in terms of the different amount of like the width that you can operate them in. So things like multi-touch attribution, that's it happens on a very small window, so you can basically use that to optimize your campaign while it's happening in flight. Randomized control trials, A/B testing, that's something that's more you get the results a lot of the times through campaigns, and you can use that to inform the planning for the next campaign. So that's more like on a campaign level. And then econometrics, that you need like 1 to 2 years worth of like historical data for that. So that's like much more around like large scale strategic planning and like channel allocation forecasting. It's not something you can kind of do within your specific activities campaign. So the idea, like the popular kind of way of thinking about it now, is you got to use all three together and kind of triangulate things and try to cover all your bases. So there's a lot of companies that are like doing that sort of thing for marketers these days. Tech infrastructure. So we just talked about use cases, right? So this is kind of the stuff that makes the use cases possible. So when we talk about tech in marketing, there's two kind of key terms that you'll see pop up, right? It's MarTech and AdTech. MarTech generally applies to tech that enables marketing use cases from an own basis, meaning that stuff around like a brand's website and app, A/B testing kind of results on a landing page, emails, push notifications, CRM, that kind of thing. And then AdTech is focused pretty much exclusively on paid advertising. It's tech that helps advertisers buy ads, things that help publishers and media owners sell ads, things to measure the performance, and other stuff that kind of add value to the process. Technically, AdTech should fall under MarTech because advertising is a subset of marketing, but that's not how it's really used in real life. Like when people say MarTech, they kind of mean this thing, and AdTech, they kind of mean that thing. Just an FYI, though you might have people argue the other way around. Another kind of trend that's happening is the two kind of sides. Like I was like 10 years ago, they were like really, really separate. Like the two kind of types of technologies didn't really talk to each other, but more and more these days, like a lot of platforms kind of play both sides in some ways or kind of overlap. So as a result, people are there's a new term that people are using called MADTECH. I wouldn't say it's like super popular, but it's kind of used at some, it's used by some folks depending on like the market you're operating in. But I mean, it's marketing and advertising together, right? But the idea here is that brands, as a brand, like, as a customer, you don't really think of your interactions with the brand in terms of, okay, I think of my brand this way when I'm on their website, and then when I see their ads, it's a completely different thing. Generally, it's kind of all one experience, right? So that's the idea where you're trying to kind of make it more holistic. And then the other trend that is worth keeping in mind is that there's like MarTech and AdTech and cloud systems are also converging quite a bit these days. So Google, for example, Google has like GCP, right? Amazon's like AWS. Like they also have pretty big advertising businesses. So the systems in the two businesses are pretty well integrated now. Like, for example, like you can use like BigQuery and GCP or like S3 in AWS as things that store data that's used for marketing purposes and things like that. So more and more, those two kind of sides are also converging, and that's creating some challenges in terms of how teams are organized, because cloud systems that's historically been something that IT teams take care of, right? Whereas like AdTech and MarTech are more like marketing team stuff, and those two teams historically don't really talk to each other, but now they have to, and that's creating like, some challenges in terms of org structure stuff and that sort of thing. So that's kind of a thing that's happening also in the industry. So in terms of what MarTech and AdTech do, they generally facilitate three things. The first is they help capture or ingest data, right? User interaction, customer profiles, data, the stuff we talked about earlier. And then data management is, the tech that's responsible for organizing the data that's collected, centralizing it, and processing it to then enable the use cases that we spoke about. And then usage is just literally using the data. So using it for all those use cases we talked about in the last section, this is kind of where that comes in. I guess the important thing is that it's not, I broke it out to three categories, but in reality, it's not that clean. Like, it overlaps quite a bit. It's not, a lot of times, like the platforms that store and manage data are also the ones that collect it, etc. So and then sometimes they're also the ones that use it. But it helps to kind of think of it that way, just from a mental model standpoint. In terms of the types of data, it's the ones we spoke about, at the beginning, and the ways that data can be collected, it can be done through JavaScript tags or pixels, which is, like if you think of like third-party tags on websites, or like, if you work in the industry, you're pretty familiar with that. It can also be through SDKs and APIs, which are, SDKs for sure are definitely more of a mobile app thing in terms of how it's used. It can be batch uploads and ETL, which is extract transfer. It's more of a data engineering thing, just like pushing large amounts of data. And then data streams when there's more of a kind of a real-time use case. And then it's stored in data management systems. So here is a list of the different types of platforms that can store user data. So I'm not going to go through, just in the interest of time, I won't go through all the sources there. You guys can kind of see that. But in terms of categories, you have like web and app analytics. So the most obvious one is the Google Analytics. It also, all the stuff on the website that it tracks, it's all kind of stored as well. You can also upload other data into it. So there's also versions of that for app, CRM, obviously, and then CDPs, which stand for customer data platforms. And the goal there is that it unifies customer data from several different sources. So it can take data from Google Analytics, taking data from your CRM, taking data from offline as well. And the idea is that it tries to unify it and kind of have it so that your customer profiles are, the identity of your customers are resolved into kind of a single source of truth, that sort of thing. Data warehouse, data lake, which is more of a cloud kind of use case, but more and more they're also used for marketing. And then the media platforms themselves. Obviously they'll collect the data that is generated from your advertising campaigns, but you can also upload first-party data into it for deployment. And then from here, I guess the other thing I'll say is that there's a lot of use cases that happen within storage itself. So like the segmentation, the identity, segmentation analysis stuff, that usually happens within these platforms. You don't really need to move it out of it. And then for the other use cases, they're usually exported into some other platform to take place. And that can be through APIs, if there's like a direct integration, or there isn't, it'd be more of like an offline batch kind of a thing. All right, so these are not a complete list of activation platforms, but these are probably the main ones that will come up the most often in terms of the platforms that use data for the different use cases we mentioned, okay? So media buying platforms is, that can be everything from like Google Ads to social networks through which, like TikTok's platform or Meta's platform. It can also be things like search, can be things like programmatic media buying platforms. But the idea here is that they all facilitate, the actual buying of that space. And then retail media networks is something that has it's a category that's really blown up in the last 2 or 3 years as like e-commerce really grew like post-COVID. But the idea here is that e-commerce brands have they have unique data about their customers and also the brands that sell on their platforms, and they've decided that hey, we can use it to create a whole advertising business. So that's really kind of taken off as well. Marketing automation and customer engagement. So this is more on the owned media side, and it automates things like real-time messaging and like how brands engage users across like email, SMS, in-app push notifications, in-app channels, that sort of thing. And that's more focused on like lead nurturing as well as like personalized engagements and like loyalty interactions. Personalization and A/B testing tools are so if you go to a website and like you see like a version and then you go to the website again, you see a different version. That's kind of this sort of technology in play. So they'll do things like based on what the brand knows about you, they might personalize the website experience in different ways, A/B testing for the optimal kind of way of the most kind of optimal engagement path, et cetera, et cetera. And then measurement platform they're basically platforms that try to automate the measurement methodologies that we talked about earlier. Okay, so I want to spend a little bit more time about AdTech on AdTech because I think this is something that it's important, but most people don't realize it. So what I have here is the earnings report for Alphabet, which is Google, the parent company for Google, and then Meta, the most recent earnings report. Okay, so I think the thing that most people don't they're not like fully aware of is that advertising kind of pays for the internet. There's a reason why most of the stuff is free, right? You can say that there's some platforms and some apps, they have a subscription model, but it's not sustainable for a lot of businesses. You can't rely on subscriptions for a lot of businesses, and especially there's going to be if a business wants to kind of enter all markets globally, there's a lot of markets where people can't pay for subscriptions, and those markets are purely funded by advertising. So just to give you guys, the reason why I included these two earnings reports is just to kind of give you guys a sense of the scale at which advertising kind of dominates their revenue. So advertising makes up 75% of Google's total revenue. 75% of all the money they make is advertising. Most of the other amount is through GCP. And then, anyone want to guess how much the percentage is for Meta? Anyone want to guess? 90? 85. Okay. Yeah. They have a tiny bit that goes into the VR headset and the Ray-Ban glasses, but it's mostly this kind of stuff. So what do you think pays for all their AI stuff, all their little things they try? It's all this stuff. Okay. And you can say there's a lot of businesses where this is, but obviously those two are the biggest ones. And in terms of kind of how much they dominate the internet, it's a pretty clear encapsulation of how it works. And then most of the websites and apps you go to, most of them are also paid for, funded through the ads they run. And that's the reason why the majority of product and UX changes on whatever app and site you use, most of the changes are done to maximize ad revenue, because the more someone spends, the stickier the site is, the more space there is for ads, and the more money they can make. So if changes are made to your favorite app and you don't understand why, this is probably why. Have y'all using LinkedIn? It's turning it into a social network, short form videos and stuff. Well, that's the reason. Their advertising revenue, I think, it's 2023 was 25%, and then now it's 2024 was 35%. I don't know what this year is, but it's probably over 50. So that's kind of the economic driving force for a lot of this kind of stuff. So really quickly, okay, yeah, we have time. Really quickly on how AdTech works. Just to kind of give you guys a sense of the dynamics. So here I have how AdTech works, open internet, right? So there's in terms of the way the landscape is referred to, The open internet, quote unquote, generally refers to like websites and apps that you can just browse that you don't have to like log into, you don't have to like create an account, that sort of thing. That's one way of describing the open internet, and then that's contrasted with what's called walled gardens, which is like a Google or like a Meta, Instagram. Like Grab would be like a local example of like a quote unquote walled garden because you have to sign and create an account, and then inside, it's everything operates kind of on its own terms. Um, Now, what's on the slide here, you have the advertiser, you have an ad exchange, you have publishers, and then you have a demand side platform, which is basically the platform that advertisers use to buy ads on the open internet. It's called demand side because that demand is in like the advertisers are um, um, there's a demand for the ad inventory, so that's why it's called demand side. And then on the other side, the supply side platform basically helps the publisher monetize their ads, make their inventory available for advertisers, and they hold supply meaning ad space, so they're called supply side platform. And so it's kind of think of this as kind of like um, a stock market, except that instead of stocks being traded, it's ads being traded. And the ad exchange basically mediates, kind of controls the whole process. Like the vast majority um, of advertising in terms of how ads are transacted these days are all kind of based on ad options, and that creates a lot of dynamics and like economics that kind of govern how a lot of this works, right? So in terms of what happens, the advertiser, they provide the budget, they provide the campaign parameters, the creative goals. On the other side, the publisher provides their inventory availability, like the pricing for how much money they want to make off of it, the formats and data. And then the demand side platform takes that, they submit um, a bid, because it's an auction, right? You're bidding for the space of the exchange. And then on the other side, the supply side platform submits what's called a bid request. A bid request means you're requesting someone to bid on the inventory, and then it kind of meets in the middle. And on a very, very high level, that's kind of how it happens. Okay. Now we contrast that. Actually, before that, I'm sorry. There's also a way for the two advertisers and publishers to work directly. In that case, the option is given is more of like a direct handshake. But the contrast that, so now we're talking about like walled gardens. So this is like, it applies to like the Googles, it applies to the Metas, the TikToks, that sort of thing. Now these guys are uniquely dominant in the industry because they own both the demand, meaning the advertisers' budgets, like isn't like basically they track the demand. They also own the supply, right? There's not kind of two sides to it. They kind of own everything. And this means that they have visibility into all the data that kind of moves, which is why their media buying algorithms are so much more powerful, because the more visibility they have into what happens, the more they can kind of fine tune everything. So here, the advertisers access the inventory directly, and then the walled garden ad platform also owns the inventory. Again, advertiser provides the budget, parameters, etc. And then everything is kind of done in the platform. And ads are still purchased through auctions, but it's more of a kind of a proprietary bidding system for that these guys manage in house. And then, like I said, the operators close the ecosystems and they control both demand and supply, which kind of makes them dominant. All right, so two more slides, and these are two important industry trends. The first one is because of all the user privacy stuff and the legislation and the tech changes. There's been a rise of what are called privacy enhancing technologies that within the technology, like the AdTech and the MarTech systems that I spoke about. So I don't know if any of you guys have taken the cybersecurity module. Okay. No. Okay. It's actually really, really interesting. It might not sound like it, but it is. Okay. But like a lot of the stuff that's taught there is peer and peer. So there's more kind of techniques that are made to make the user data pseudonymous. There's techniques around hashing, encryption that are being applied. There's something called differential privacy, which is basically adding noise to data so individual users can't be identified, etc. So all that is a lot of the MarTech systems and AdTech systems that I talked about earlier. A lot of this is making its way through the industry, and there's entirely new categories of tech that are popping up that are leveraging these privacy enhancing technologies as a response to kind of the calls for more user privacy, etc. And then the last thing is, of course, AI. You guys are probably wondering why I didn't talk about it. So obviously, like, yeah, it's going to massively disrupt everything. It's probably, a single slide doesn't really do it justice. But I guess the one thing I'll say is that most people in the industry really don't understand like how much it's going to like disrupt everything, and like how different things will look 5 years from now. You can probably say that about society in general, but there's a lot that we don't know in terms of how what's going to happen. But I think even at this point, like just from where I'm standing, there's already like these are already kind of areas where I think there's going to be massive changes, right? So, content creation, obviously, like ad space is the content that exists in digital channels, right? Largely speaking, and if the percent of content that's online that's AI generated is going to increase, and it's going to become harder and harder to tell what is and isn't human made, and maybe some brands don't like that, some do. That's going to change the whole the economics and the supply and demand within the industry itself. So that's going to be a big disruption. Consumer engagement, obviously, like AI is going to continue to fundamentally alter how folks consume content. I think you can already see how much has changed search. Like I don't know if a lot of you guys like no longer Google as much and they're using like Perplexity or just using like and Google's building it into their search as well, right? And if people's behavior changes and how they engage content changes, well, that's also going to change how marketers are meeting their consumers, right? And then AI avatars. So China's already using AI generated characters for like social commerce. And then I think Meta, I don't think they've done it yet. They're planning on bringing AI characters into their apps. So when you start having like AI influencers and stuff, that's going to also change like the economics of that. Creative development is probably the most like integrated generative UI use case at the moment. Like within kind of buying platforms like Google and Meta, like you can if you just upload like basic assets, they can generate like thousands of different variations if you're creative and try to match that with different people. So that's already a thing. And then media planning and buying, like there's like the buying platforms I talked about earlier. Like I talked about how like people go in there and change things and do settings and things like that. There's already platforms where you just kind of type in what you're trying to do, and then it'll do it, kind of like a ChatGPT interface. Like that's already starting to happen now. And then the last thing is, I think most of you guys are aware of like AI agents, where it kind of goes out and does what you want. There's startups coming out of the U.S. that are basically trying to automate away a lot of like the operational stuff that happens within ad agencies. You're basically replacing kind of entire people with agents. It's still pretty early, but if that obviously this is the worst that it's ever going to be, right? So if it gets better in the next 2 or 3 years, agencies need less people to do the marketing. Then you can kind of imagine what's going to start happening in terms of talent and how that's going to work. So that's it. Covered a lot of ground in about an hour. So thanks for that. Reason why like so much money is being spent on those platforms. Again, it comes back to demand and supply, right? So like for like one way to think about like Facebook and like Meta, Instagram or whatever is they're what's called demand aggregators. Demand meaning like demand for the content, right? So they have basically billions of people using their apps and whatnot. So that attracts a lot of consumers, and then that creates a lot of surface area for brands. Because brands want to reach consumers, and all those consumers are there. On the other side, they also have, in terms of the amount of supply that they have, the amount of supply meaning ad space they have. So like on Instagram, Facebook, like social media, like they have infinite supply because users are creating supply because their social media people create the content on those things that people are always going to keep creating it. So they also have infinite supply. And on Google, like in terms of they have a big network of websites, but they also, they're the dominant search engine as well. They also own YouTube. That's a big part of it as well. So like in terms of the amount of ad supply they have, so they basically have both the demand and supply. So if you're a brand and you want to a single place to reach as many people as possible and be able to spend a lot of money, it's a very kind of easy choice. And then also they have the most data on people probably more data on people than any other company that exists these days. So the amount of ad products that they can create off the back of that data, whether that's like targeting very specific segments, whether that's creating algorithms that are quote unquote more efficient. I mean, there's you can argue that, but like they're going to show a better result because the algorithms are stronger because they have access to more data and more ad space to optimize against. So for those reasons, it's a very easy choice for advertisers, not just like big brands. Like most of the money they make is from like SMBs and medium like long tail customers, because their platforms are also made to be really easy to use. Like they're trying. That's the reason why they're trying to make things like more and more simple on the front end and leave more things for the algorithms to handle, because that means that SMBs that don't really have a marketing team, it's just like 2 or 3 people. Like they don't really need to much. They can just put money in and it'll perform for them. So that's where like a lot of their money, a big percentage of the revenue comes from, is from like the long tail and medium tail as well. So for all those reasons, like that's why they attract like so much money from an ad standpoint. Well, there's so within different platforms. So like just take Google for example. So within Google Ads, like they have multi-touch attribution built in. So like you can in the settings you can like turn on like data-driven attribution, and it'll track, it'll attribute the results of your campaign using the multi-touch algorithms. I think GA also Google Analytics also has data-driven attribution built in. So like from there, like it's just a setting. Obviously, I think it needs a minimum amount of like there's like minimum requirements for like the number of conversions you have and the volume to be able to for that to happen. But that's like built in already, and more platforms are offering that. There's also obviously you can do it manually, like if you have data scientists and you have access to all your data in a data warehouse, they can run models themselves. But there's also more and more companies that focus on just on measurement in marketing, and then they have platforms that kind of you as the marketer, you upload your campaign data, you upload your sales, your revenue, whatever, and then it'll basically do that, carry out dash it'll run the models over your data for you, and you'll be able to get those results, or you can sync it with your campaign. So those are and those are like last like 2 years, more and more of those kind of companies have been popping up. So yeah.